Hey, welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to discuss further the book of James and some of Tim Keller's thoughts as he did a sermon series on it in 1995. Tim starts with the comment that if you can master your words, you can master your life. And when he's making this statement, he's really deep diving James chapter 2, which talks about the tongue and what we need to do to tame it and how we can best utilize it for God's glory. In his sermon, he really gives us some practical applications and some examples of how we can better live, how we can think about what it is that we say and influence people in the right direction. So I'm just going to spend a couple of moments discussing the sermon, providing some topics of conversation that might help you in a small group setting, or just provide some points that will help you in your own personal study or meditation. So Tim Keller starts by talking about the book of James in general and how practical of a letter it is for Christian living and for our daily walk. He distinguishes what a good profession of faith should look like, or a real faith versus a faith that isn't really there. Then he goes in and he outlines what the Christian lifestyle should look like. And he mentions at the end of chapter 1 in James that the outline for the book is there, where the first section is talking about the poor and how we should treat the poor. The second chapter focuses on, or chapter 3 rather, the tongue and how we need to tame it in order to have self-mastery over our life. And then the third area of focus is the world and how we should live in contrast to how people within the world live. And today we're really going to focus on the tongue. In his sermon on self-mastery, it's interesting that when we think about this topic of self-mastery, really the place that Tim takes us is talking about the tongue in chapter 2. And again, he says, quotable, "If you can master your tongue, you can master your life." So really focusing and meditating on what is it that we're saying? Is it edifying? And how can we harness our tongue to do good? He talks about the topic of judgment. Can Christians be judged? And if so, can that affect our salvation? Well, Tim clarifies that when it comes to judgment, a Christian cannot lose their salvation. But there is a certain level of merit to our behavior as Christians. God's given us responsibility to live a certain way. And we're to hold that standard, and we're to adequately utilize the resources he's given us to do good, and that we're going to be held accountable to that in some sense. He uses the analogy of being a parent. If you have sons or daughters, you're never going to cast them out from your family, but you will hold them accountable for certain behavior because you're trying to grow them for good. And Tim states that's exactly the point that James is trying to make in chapter 3 when he talks about the tongue. We'll be evaluated for what we do here on earth, and each one of us is resourced differently. He mentions that James is really trying to humble the blessed. So if you live in the United States, as many of us do who are probably watching this content, most of us probably have, for the most part, pretty good circumstances, whether it be financially, whether it be access, whether it be health. If we're given those things, then we're called to serve at a higher level. And so God is going to be looking for us to steward those things well and to utilize them for his glory. And we'll be held accountable or evaluated in the sense of how we're utilizing those resources for good. And so there's an onus there to do good things. Not that we're going to be saved by those good works. Salvation is a completely different topic in a different context. But we need to take inventory of what we have and evaluate, are we performing at our highest and best use with what we've been given? Again, James, his intent here is to humble us and to help us to realize that we have a lot of responsibility on our shoulders, and we need to be thinking through, what are we going to do with that responsibility? To whom much is given, much will be required. That's a quote that Tim Keller mentioned here. So think about, what do you have? What are your skill sets? What are your traits? How are you utilizing your microphone? How are you utilizing your knowledge of Jesus Christ and who he is? Are you sharing your faith? Are you zealous for his word? Are you using your sphere of influence or educating those people who are in your life of the good works of Jesus Christ and what he's done? I think that's what James is really holding us to in this letter. The other piece is that Tim mentions is don't envy or resent other people in the church for what their gifts are, specifically our teachers, our pastors. they're held to a higher level and a higher standard, almost to the extent where James is advocating, hey, don't come into ministry and don't be a teacher unless you're willing to bear that weight. So we have to be very careful about that. Even me recording this video, I have to think very carefully about what I'm saying because I'm going to be judged and held accountable to it. That's true if you're a small group leader. It's true if you're in ministry. It's really true at any point if you're speaking about the Word of God. So we have to bear that very carefully. We can't be flippant about what we're saying and what we're communicating. We really have to weigh it against the Scripture and make sure that the words that we're stating are well researched, they're meditated upon, they're prayed over before we state them. But we do have a right to hold our teachers to a higher standard. Because it's a position of power and authority, that we have to ensure that those that are in that position are stewarding it well. Too many times people are drawn away from the church, and Tim provides 3 examples of where people have been harmed in the past by teachers. And we need to hold those people accountable, and we need to be sure that we don't fall into the same trappings. The 3 cases he mentions are your dictatorial style teacher, someone who is power hungry, who doesn't want to be challenged, and just wants followers and people to comply. In the age of social media, this is a huge temptation as teachers are given a greater platform than ever before. In fact, I don't know that I'd even have a platform outside of my small group setting if it wasn't for YouTube or Facebook or some of these other mechanisms. So therefore, there's a whole lot of responsibility, and we have to bear that carefully. All teachers do. The other category where teachers have gone wrong is those that have injured people with their teachings. Tim mentions a scenario where he knew a teacher that was telling members to not wear contacts or not wear glasses because by doing that, they were basically stating that they didn't trust in God for healing. Now, we know that's pretty common sense, that's pretty injurious teaching. We have to be very careful about that. And people who are teaching that, we have to hold them accountable scripturally through the Word. And then the third type of category that he mentions are cheaters. Those who have been hypocritical, those who have cheated financially or sexually, then that is an area where that judgment is going to be absolutely merited. So watch out for those 3 categories. Hold those teachers accountable, and don't be guilty of falling into those same trappings. Tim goes on to say that God is going to correct those people. If you're a teacher and you're abusing in one of those areas, that he is going to hold you accountable in some capacity. So those teachers will have their day, and it's not for us to envy or judge them. We don't know what their circumstances are. We don't know what their challenges are that they're facing. But understand that we don't need to hate them or scorn them, but that God will hold them accountable because of the gifting he's given them to teach. They haven't stewarded it well. The other part of that coin, though, is that many people masquerade as teachers who aren't even Christians at all. Those are wolves in sheep's clothing. That judgment and standard is going to be completely different than what James is speaking about here. What's going to happen in that case is eternal damnation in hell. That's very different than those that are Christians that are teaching but have abused their role and authority. Distinguish those 2 things, and Tim does. Finally, he leaves us with 6, basically a challenge, a 1-week challenge of 6 things to think about when we speak and use our tongue. Now, when I read through this list, it's very humbling because I know, and even Tim mentions that within the first hour, it's almost impossible not to break one. But here's the standard that we need to try to hold ourselves to as we go forward. And I posted this to my Facebook page as well, which is Tim Keller's devotionals and gems and other sayings. You can find that on Facebook through a search, but here they are, all 6. Number 1, do not complain or grumble. Number 2, do not boast. Number 3, do not gossip or repeat bad information. Number 4, do not run somebody down or disparage other people. Number 5, do not defend yourself or excuse yourself of your behavior. Number 3, do always affirm other people. Whether you're doing those things well or not, it reveals who you are. So look at these statements almost as if they're a mirror on your behavior or performance. Strive to do better in these areas. I know that I will, and I'm very guilty of failing in all those areas myself. And Tim leaves us with the comment that words can redirect your heart. So when you're saying affirming things, your heart is going to conform to that standard that you're speaking to. And of course, the ultimate way to heal your words, Tim states, is to worship and to praise Jesus. So as we meditate and reflect upon who he is, those are going to conform our words to become healing words, to be life-giving words. And that's the true way that we improve, is by putting on Jesus and dying to ourselves daily. Well, I hope these comments were helpful to you in your own devotional and study. Again, please like and subscribe to my channel. I'm going to continue to provide these short snippets or summarizations of Tim Keller's sermons as we continue to grow and promote his ministry now that he's no longer with us. Thank you so much and have a blessed Sunday.